Rebirthing. What is it? Obviously it has some connection with birth. And each of us, in our own way, have had some sort of a trauma around our birth experience, whether we remember it or not. We can have all sorts of problems with the birth itself, like a breech birth, or a caesarean, or we might have been put in an incubator after birth, or our mother might have had problems during the pregnancy, our parents might have argued. And these are memories which generally are suppressed. We go through life without any access to them at all. Rebirthing was presented to me 21 years ago now as a gentle exercise in letting go of the past, letting go of things that hurt or humiliated. And it worked for me. I had suffered for many years from clinical depression, and after 8 rebirths, I suddenly found myself. And I experienced what I can only describe as a miracle. I've never looked back, and all the medications I used to take for depression have long since been consigned to the bin. I was so impressed with the effects of rebirthing that I determined immediately to train, and that I did in 1989 with the Loving Relationships training in London. Since then I've probably rebirthed about 100 clients in all. Some have had 1 rebirth, some have had perhaps 20. And one thing I can say is that the rebirth is at the very least a relaxing and pleasant experience, and at the very most an extremely profound healing of the spirit. It was never presented to me as a spiritual healing, but I think it probably is. Because somewhere in the interface between the human body and mind and spirit, rebirthing creates a deep understanding and acceptance somehow. I know, for example, that the body holds on to all sorts of things, and from my own experience I can give you a couple of examples. When I was training, there was a young lady called Pat who was 6 months pregnant at the time, and at the end of we trainees watching a rather harrowing video concerning difficult births, including a caesarean birth, including a breech birth and forceps. The last was a forceps birth. The trainer turned to Pat, as we all sat around feeling rather drained, and said to her, "Oh, you were a forceps birth, weren't you?" And we all turned, and there on Pat's forehead were 2 great bumps, and this was a lady of 36. So those bumps waited 36 years to be manifested in her body. And for myself, I can attest to smelling anaesthetic in the room after rebirthing 2 ladies, neither of whom had been near a hospital in 4 years. That's not my imagination, it was definitely anaesthetic. So I know that the body holds on to stuff. Rebirthing takes the form of the client laying down on a bed or a couch, and me, the rebirther, sitting next to him or her and helping them to breathe. You, the client, will be asked to breathe very deeply, very high up into the lungs. As we all know, that the human brain isn't utilised to its full extent. Is it 30% that people claim? Well, the lungs are not used to their full extent either. And I try to encourage clients to breathe just a little bit deeper than they usually do, just to open up that odd little air sac, and there are thousands and thousands of them, just that little bit more fully than they ever have done before. And that, in my mind, helps them to feel and experience just that little bit more than they have before. Now, when you go jogging, you breathe more deeply than usual, to support the action of the limbs and the heart. And the oxygen that you take in is, they say, burned up in the activity. But when you rebirth, you're laying down and you're breathing equally deeply. Where does the oxygen go? Well, I'm not a doctor, but as far as I'm aware, it goes to the trillions and trillions of cells that make up your body. And that includes your brain and your heart, and all the other cells, in the legs and the trunk and the chest, the limbs. And what effect does that have? Well, I don't know again. But somehow it seems to relax a client to an extent where they can let go lots of the stresses that they've held in place ever since, for example, they were lifted up by a doctor at birth and banged on the back, or ever since they were taken away from their mother and put in a room aside, when perhaps a boy baby would think, oh, women always leave me, or the girl baby who was held up by the doctor and hurt thinks men always hurt me. Try to imagine those two people meeting when they're 18. It could be a difficult relationship. It took me nearly 50 years to discover rebirthing, and I'm an utter proponent of it. I think it's a wonderful, wonderful thing. And I have clients in the Brighton area and in Norwich and London who will attest to having had profound changes in their lives for the better as a result of rebirthing. I use quite a lot of different visualizations to help my clients let go, to help my clients see who they really are, to feel their power, to feel their wonderfulness. As a rebirther, I tend to share with other rebirthers the idea that each of us has a personal lie. That personal lie is always one of two things. Either I'm not wanted, or I'm not good enough. And I emphasize the word lie. Those are not true. But many of us live through large chunks or even all our lives believing them, and not living in the wholeness of our being, but only in a part of it. Just as we only breathe with part of our lungs, we can breathe with all our lungs.
How many sessions would it normally take to kind of relieve depression, for instance?
It could. I think depression would be relieved within 5 or 6. We do tend to recommend a minimum of 10 sessions because rebirthing is a profound therapy. It doesn't scratch the surface, it goes very deep, and we acknowledge that. And in fact, I revere rebirthing as I revere my clients. So yes, somewhere between 6 and 10 probably, Phil.
And what things would you recommend that I do in addition, sort of as homework? Do you have homework? And I know you mentioned
Yes. Thank you for asking that. It's a good question. Affirmations are terribly important. These are written affirmations that I would give you as homework. To change a mindset that's been with you probably for many years, and to change the negative to positive, to change from sadness to happiness. It will always take a little time. The time you spend away from me and away from the rebirthing itself is vital. And also I would be able to give you some short breath exercises to do when you stand at a bus stop, for example. You can breathe extra deeply for a few minutes. Or when you're in the bath, you can do a very short breath for 5, and then a very long one. 5 times. times. It's amazing how it can lift your mood just doing that.
So can you learn to rebirth yourself?
You can learn the principles. I find it very difficult to rebirth myself because it's amazing how quickly you become sort of unconscious of what you're doing with your breath. So you do need within a rebirth this coach who says, come on Michael, come on, breathe deeply, reminding you to breathe. So I always say, don't forget to breathe.
I'm really interested, Michael. What do I do next if I want to get a rebirth from you?
Well, I'd ask you to fill in a questionnaire which asks you quite a lot of questions around your birth and early life experiences, which have caused you to make decisions which may not now be in your best interests. And we would then have a 1-hour interview together for which there's no charge. So you can get to know me a bit, and I can get to know you and know exactly why you're coming. It's very important to have the right rebirther, as it is for me to have the right client. And then we would hopefully make an appointment for your first rebirth, which incidentally a rebirth normally takes 2 hours, of which perhaps half an hour maybe talking, an hour to don't forget to breathe.